The story you think you know is all silk and spotlight. Blake Lively as the untouchable it girl, the face of glossy teen fantasy, the woman who seemed to glide through Hollywood with perfect timing and perfect hair. But the story you're watching now opens on a very different image. Blake Lively arriving at a New York federal courthouse for a court-ordered settlement conference connected to her legal battle with Justin Baldoni, her director and co-star on It Ends With Us. The talks lasted about 6 hours and ended with no deal, and the case is headed toward a trial currently scheduled for May 18th, 2026. That contrast is your entire kids versus now engine. The woman once framed as Serena Woodsen, effortless, unbothered, mythically in control, now standing inside a process where control doesn't come from image, but from evidence, procedures, and court dates. A red carpet can be managed. A courtroom can't. And once you realize that, the timeline hits harder because it stops being about celebrity evolution and becomes about what happens when the fantasy collides with a real-world conflict that refuses to stay private. So here's the hook question that keeps viewers locked. How did a woman branded as the definition of composed glamour end up in the most public kind of fight, one that is now officially moving toward a May trial? And to answer it, you don't start with Gossip Girl. You start with the childhood that trained her to survive a camera long before the world decided what she was supposed to represent. Blake Lively's Kids to Now timeline begins in Los Angeles, not in a mansion fantasy, but in a family where the entertainment industry wasn't a distant dream. It was everyday life. She was born August 25th, 1987, and grew up surrounded by people who understood auditions, scripts, and the quiet rules nobody writes down. Her father, Ernie Lively, was an actor, and her parents taught acting classes. So as a child, Blake often sat in those classes instead of being left with babysitters. That detail matters because it explains the confidence people call natural. She wasn't born calm on camera. She watched the drills, learned the rhythm, and absorbed the mechanics of performance early. Her first on-screen appearance came young. She made her professional debut in Sandman, 1998, directed by her father. It wasn't the kind of debut that instantly changes your life, but it does change your wiring. When you work on sets as a kid, you learn to wait, to take notes, to hide nerves. You learn that adults run the clock, and you learn that being easy to work with can become a survival skill. What's interesting is that even with that environment, Blake wasn't always locked on acting as destiny. Biographical accounts note she initially wasn't interested in acting and even talked about wanting to attend Stanford. That nuance makes her more human. Her path wasn't just born to be famous. It was a series of doors opening inside a family that already knew where the hallway led. This is the foundation of your story. A girl trained to perform, raised close to the machine, and slowly pulled into the spotlight, long before the world decided to label her perfect. The first time the public truly noticed Blake Lively as her own presence was The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, 2005. That's where she starts reading as more than industry kid. She had that camera-friendly warmth, charisma that looks effortless, which is exactly the type of quality Hollywood loves because it sells instantly. Then came the earthquake. Gossip Girl, 2007 to 2012. Serena Woodsen wasn't just a character, she was a cultural shortcut. She represented a fantasy, glamour without sweat, confidence without cracks, a life that looked painless. And fantasies create a weird kind of ownership. When millions of people meet you through a character, they start expecting the person to match the myth. This is where the rise begins to carry the seeds of its own problem. Teen TV fame doesn't just give you a platform, it locks you into an image at the exact age when you're supposed to be messy in private. Instead, every change becomes a headline, every boundary becomes a rumor, and the more you look composed, the less empathy you get when life gets complicated, because the public has already decided your brand is unbothered. After Gossip Girl, Blake's career becomes a deliberate pivot, proving she's not Serena forever, choosing roles that feel more adult, and building a public persona that is still signals control. She also becomes half of a famously watched Hollywood marriage, another layer of visibility that can look like a fairy tale but comes with constant public projection. And then comes the project that changes the tone of her entire Now chapter. It Ends With Us, a film that, on the surface, looked like another high-profile career move, but behind the scenes would become tied to allegations serious enough to move from internet speculation into federal court. Here's where the Kids versus Now story stops being a glow-up and becomes a case file. Blake Lively has sued Justin Baldoni, alleging sexual harassment and retaliation connected to the production of It Ends With Us. Baldoni has denied the allegations. When you say that on YouTube, the most important thing is precision, allegations, and denials, because this is an active legal dispute, not a completed story. But even without a verdict, the emotional peak is already visible. The public shift from a style icon at premieres to actor arriving at court. On February 11th, 2026, the two sides attended a court-ordered settlement conference in New York. The talks ran for about 6 hours, and they ended without an agreement, meaning the case moves forward, deeper into discovery and trial prep. And then there's the date that turns this into a countdown. May 18th, 2026, the trial date currently on the calendar. The case has also been covered as potentially star-studded, because filings and reporting have referenced numerous public figures as possible people with information, an element that makes the internet treat this like a spectacle. That's where the real dark truth lives, not only in what's alleged, but in what modern fame does to conflict. It turns serious claims into content. It invites strangers to choose teams before the court tests facts. It pressures everyone involved to fight on two fronts at once, the legal front and the public opinion front. This is the emotional peak you narrate. The moment the myth meets a system that doesn't care how iconic you are. Now the channel take. Clean, grounded, and powerful. This story is irresistible online because it looks like celebrity drama, but it's actually about workplace power, reputational warfare, and what happens when allegations become a legal process instead of a whisper. The worst thing viewers can do is treat it like a sport. The loudest comment section isn't evidence. The strongest stand thread isn't testimony. The only responsible way to cover this is to stay anchored to what's confirmed, what's alleged, what's denied, what the court has scheduled, and what has not been decided yet. And that's exactly why the nostalgia works so well here. When you cut old footage, Serena stepping into a party like the world can't touch her, then hard cut to courthouse steps in 2026, the viewer feels something unsettling, the realization that Untouchable was always an edit. Serena was written to be flawless. Blake Lively has to be human in public. The open ending is the retention lock. As of current reporting, settlement talks failed on February 11th, 2026, and the trial is scheduled for May 18th, 2026. Between now and then, anything can happen. Motions, rulings, possible renewed settlement efforts, but you don't promise outcomes. You promise a timeline. So you close like this. If the early chapter was about being turned into a fantasy, the now chapter is about what it costs when that fantasy collapses under real claims and real procedure. And whether the final ruling favors one side or the other, Blake Lively's public story has already shifted from icon to case file, because once the spotlight becomes a courtroom, the narrative stops being written by stylists and starts being written by the record.